I love the fact people say it's 35 years. I started in such and such in 1983, so a very long time ago. I probably think the most pivotal moment for me was when I first became a client, because I'd spent, until I joined the Coca-Cola company in 1993, I'd been 10 years on the agency side, and all of a sudden I was the person on the other side of the table that would say yes or no, and actually I suddenly realized the complexity of what happens inside a company, and inside an agency. Didn't really know that. It was very naive of me. So I remember I sat in meetings listening to people think, oh, good God, I used to say shit like that. So it was a big learning thing to first become a client. But great, because I also understood the other side of the fence. It was a very fast process of learning, because we had an awful lot to get done when I joined the Coca-Cola company. And in Atlanta, I think my boss, Sergio Zeman, said to me in September 1993 that he wanted great creativity, a great film, because that's what it was in those days, on every single one of our 24 brands by April. So I had no time to mess about, and had to learn how to get great work quickly. And of course, great work is clarity of brief, clarity of strategy, and clarity of feedback, and then you get great work. So, pivotal moment. Well, obviously, it would be remarkably arrogant of me to say that anything I did changed the trajectory of the Coca-Cola brand, because it was great. But one of the things that we really did, and I'm proud of looking back, is change how we did sponsorship advertising. So you're way too young to remember this yourself, but the way sponsorship advertising used to be done, it was just proud sponsor of, whether it was the Olympics or the World Cup or the Cricket World Cup. And actually we rechanged that by orienting it back to why we were doing it, which was for the fans. So the Olympic campaign in 1996 for the US was all about Coca-Cola for the fans. Probably my favorite piece of creativity though was for the Cricket World Cup when it was in India. And we used the color red, because the color red of the Coca-Cola brand, and the color red for passion, and of course red and all its symbolism in India too. So very powerful work. If you looked at it now, you would think look at it. It's very good, stands the test of time. So changing from RBS to NatWest, very easy thing to say, much more complex thing to do. I joined in 2015 as part of the cleanup team, but I had the great privilege of having gardening leave between jobs. I recommend highly to anybody in your career, get a job that means you have to have gardening leave. And when I was on gardening leave, having left Barclays, I could look from the outside at the state of RBS, and the thing that became very clear is that RBS was a brand that had been invented to become a global brand. The customer-facing brand was the Royal Bank of Scotland, and in fact anybody who banks with the bank in Scotland calls it the Royal Bank and are very proud to do so. They don't call it RBS. It was people internally who built RBS, and they built it to drive global growth. And briefly, RBS was in fact the #1 bank in the world, and it became the #1 bank in the world by buying ABN AMRO, and that's the thing that also caused the collapse. So back in 2008, when the state saved RBS, it was a long while, in fact I think until 2016, until we first made a profit, 2016, 2017. And when we were looking at the reputational data around the customer-facing brands, they were getting better. NatWest was getting stronger, the Royal Bank was getting stronger, but RBS as a brand was as dead as it ever was. So we dropped it, and my parting gift was to change the name of the group to the NatWest Group. I think the trick to being a great marketing leader today is to make sure you build the right capability around you, and that you unleash that capability and empower people to do what they're good at, but at the same time getting them behind the strategy that you set, and making sure you use the gift of feedback to keep everybody on task on strategy. Well, it's very timely that I'm speaking here, because last week I was in an event called Advertising Who Cares, an event convened by people who were worried about the state of the advertising sector. And I'm very excited to share the output of that. but particularly to try and get everybody to sign up to the movement that is now advertising Who Cares. Obviously, one of the things that's changed in the time I've been in the business is the speed of the feedback and the channels available to share and collaborate. So as I was getting ready to get on the plane yesterday, I posted on LinkedIn how excited I was to come here, why I was coming here, what I was going to do. And then you watch the feedback you get. So I think good use, sharing content is a great thing to do. Picking out the key themes and trying to keep it crisp and simple. Because these days, you know, what I say here can travel around the world at the speed of light. You have to be very careful what you say, but equally, upside of that is you can learn so fast as long as you have an open mind and you're prepared to listen to others. One of the privileges I've had in recent times is to host the WFA Better Marketing podcast. And this very subject is something we talked about, and the previous CEO of Diageo was a great one for reverse mentorship. He thought the most exciting things were happening in what once were called the emerging and developing markets. Pretty arrogant thing to call them, by the way. Look at the size of some of those BRICS economies. But to make sure that you're listening hard to what's happening in a local market and looking for things that you can celebrate the success of and they can travel back. So to do that, and I'll use the example of Johnny Walker, if you have a great brand idea like Keep Walking and you are sensitive to local culture, you can make that work wherever you go. You don't do the same thing everywhere, you build the same brand but making it culturally relevant. And I think that's what I see happening in many emerging markets. I think the most surprising lesson when you're coaching people in the marketing industry is how readily people take feedback and how clear you have to be in it. And in fact, if I go back to my first stint of being a consultant, I was very proud one day when I walked into a meeting. It was for some Vodafone folk, and one of them said, "Oh, here comes our insultant." So I think to be the best consultant, you have to be an insultant. Don't be afraid to tell the truth. Don't do the group thing. Don't do what everybody's saying round the table. Bring a different point of view and listen hard. So it's back to the gift of feedback, straightforward feedback in the interests of the business. When I first became a client and I met Dan Wheldon, obviously the man who founded Wheldon and Kennedy, and I asked him why he wasn't a member of the 4As in the US. He said, because it's a talking shop where nobody shares anything and nobody makes any difference. And that stuck with me. Dan, rest in peace, was wrong, actually, because in my experience, you know, the best sharing comes from working through associations. And actually, as I can safely say now, having reflected on my career, my time as the president of the WFA, which I did from 2015 to 2019, was one of the most satisfying things in my career. And what made it satisfying was to watch how willing people were to share what they were doing. It was always in a closed environment, so client to client, but people were very open with their sharing, very willing to share. And if you sign up for these associations, that's the input you get. And actually, if you look at the local associations, and obviously I'm here hosted by PAS, you get great sharing locally, you get the ability to bring in things globally as well, and that enriches what you're doing, because you know the marketing world that I grew up in was probably full of more arrogant, you know, I know what I'm doing people. And actually one of the sound bites I'm happy to borrow from a good friend of mine, David Wheldon, is don't be a know-all, be a learn-it-all. You can learn so much by participating in collaborative fora. Well, this is, you know, you're going to need to look this quirky idea up online, but when I was meeting with Sir John Hegarty to prepare what we were going to talk about last week, we were talking about the lack of great creativity these days, and then he started talking about a brand called Cereal, which is healthy breakfast cereal based on the customer insight that people of my age grew up eating lots of cereal and still have the habit of doing that, but at the same time want to be health aware. So people have created a brand called Surreal, S-U-R-R-E-A-L. I immediately ordered some of the products. They were great, but it's very neatly marketed, great packaging, great design, a great customer insight, and uses every channel available to market itself really strongly. It's a nice quirky idea. All the events I choose to go to, I think the WFA Global Congress is the one that has delivered every time. Great convening of people, great crisp content, and kept nice and punchy, with great opportunity to network as well, and of course enough time for fun, but doesn't invade your space too much. Brilliant. Creativity in the industry at the moment is in a bit of a crisis, and you can see that through the proliferation of advertising and formats and content, and we're bombarded now with more than ever. It was with very heavy heart that I paid the money to YouTube to not have advertising, with the irony of that was not lost on me. This is an advertising platform, and in order to make yet more money from you, you have to pay to avoid it. Now, I think that's happening far and wide, and one of the reasons for that is that I don't think people have quite got the hang of how to do great creativity in the multiplicity of channels available today. And this, if you look back, this has happened with every change, every arrival of a new channel. So, when radio first arrived, people were going, oh, it won't be as good as print. And then when TV arrived, and so on. And through each change of channel, creativity has got better, just as it has in the content, by the way. So there's some irony as well. In my advertising days, there used to be an annual survey to ask customers whether they preferred the advertising over the programming. And up until 1992 in the UK, consumers always preferred the advertising over the programming. Now, that's totally the reverse. And if you look at the creativity being led by some of the streaming platforms, they look at the great content on Netflix and other platforms are available. I think commercial creativity will catch up. I think people need to think about advertising as commercial creativity, and that will help. So I'm optimistic, but right now you would worry about the state of the creativity around the world, just because people are losing trust in it as well. I think if you want to be a great marketeer today, you have to be unswerving in your passion for what you're doing. You have to be curious, you have to be humble, you have to be collaborative, but you also have to work hard and deliver. And if you do, you will be successful. But above all, be yourself.